The French President François Hollande has described the atrocities as an act of war. The French Prime Minister Manuel Valls says that the Islamic militants who carried out the coordinated attacks were planned and organised from Syria by ISIS. He says the authorities believe further terror attacks are being planned against France and other European countries, which all really begs the question, what do we do about it? How can ISIS be defeated? So is brute military force the solution, and how involved should Britain be? Or is the key to winning the war on ISIS all about our security services, about beefing up their resources and their powers of surveillance? We've got a panel of experts in the studio to discuss those two broad options for tackling the terrorists. They are Lindsey German, a convener from the Stop the War Coalition, Charlie Wolfe, journalist, commentator and broadcaster, and Professor Michael Clarke, the director of the Royal United Services Institute. So let's go through these two options and start with option one.
We ramp up military action against them. We're already bombing ISIS in Iraq, but do we join the French, the Americans and others by doing the same in Syria too? Perhaps we go further and work with Iraq, Iran and Russia, or even further, should we muscle in with boots on the ground? Or we keep out of it. We don't want to make the UK a bigger target.
Lindsey German, first thought, bomb them where they are.
Well, I think we've already seen that the bombing, which has been going on for over a year as we speak, has been a failure, that actually it's led to the recruitment to ISIS. It's led to very, very large numbers of casualties, but the ISIS forces have more than recruited to make up for that. It's also now only being carried out by the United States and France. Australia has stopped its bombing because Russia is involved. Canada has pulled out, and all the Middle Eastern countries have pulled out. So I think this idea that everybody's bombing except for Britain is false. And I think for Britain to get involved in this would be a disaster and would learn none of the lessons that we should have learnt from Iraq.
Well, France is doing it now. They're doing it for a reason, aren't they?
France is doing it now, but I don't think it's the solution to the terrible events that happened on Friday. I think actually it will only make things worse, and we will see a situation where there will be more recruits to ISIS and there will be more terror attacks, and we have to break this whole cycle.
We need to get serious about this, and it's a whole panoply of things: boots on the ground, planes in the air.
But believe me, there's a wave building out there. It's hit Paris partly because Paris is a softer target, and Paris has been attacked much more than we have recently. But the security services know that the UK is just as much a target as France.
So, Lindsey, hanging off them and stepping back is not the option here. Well, it doesn't save us.
I think we have to look at what has caused ISIS. ISIS came from the occupation of Iraq. It began in 2007. That was when it became a force there. It then moved later to Syria. We have now bombed Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and if you include the allies of Britain, Syria as well. What has the consequence been? Terrorism has got worse. It hasn't got better. So when we say, how do we save people from terrorism, we have to start looking at the root causes. We also have to look at a very important thing, which is a whole number of states in the Middle East have been aiding ISIS in one way or another, including some of our closest allies, including Turkey, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And maybe if the British government wants to do anything, it should start putting pressure there.
So there is no strategy. We need one. It's not just bombs. It is the whole armory that we have. Again, boots on the ground. It's
you send troops into Syria?
If needed.
Militarily, you could achieve the objective militarily, at least in theory, relatively easily. The question is, what do you do then? What do you do then? And with Western forces, again, as it were, camped in the Middle East with a strange political strategy that they're trying to make up as they go along, most people in the West think that's probably not the way forward.
OK, let's look at a second option here.
Option 2, increased security measures. David Cameron tells us that 7 recent UK terror plots have been foiled. Now, we're told we're getting nearly 2,000 extra spies in MI5, MI6 and GCHQ. So, is bolstering the security services the right course of action? Do we give them extra surveillance powers? Should we also beef up border security and passport checks?
Well, that will definitely all happen in France. Lindsey German, is that what you would prefer? Something very muscular here at home?
No, I think we have to, again, look at what has caused this. And what we're doing is we've increased surveillance and security to an unprecedented level in this country, much, much greater than anything that existed during the IRA bombing campaign in the 1970s. Sorry?
You might say it's working.
Well,
we haven't been hit yet.
Well, we have been hit, and the people, for example, who hit
10
us
years ago.
in 2005 were people who were known to the security forces. And the problem is with the individuals, as I understand it, concerned with these attacks in Paris, many of them were known to the security forces. It doesn't help, but what it does do, it creates a climate where people begin to think that they're under surveillance unfairly because they're Muslims. It begins to create a climate of racism against Muslims, which we're seeing. We've seen attacks in Britain over the last few days towards Muslims. We've seen a rise in racism. So I think we have to be extremely careful and say the problem here is not going to be more surveillance, that however you try to do it, it isn't going to work. It has to be political solutions. It has to be a solution to the war in Syria.
Unfortunately, I don't see, if I was a Muslim, how I would be offended knowing it's protecting me as well. Once that's explained, we really need to find these people before they cause this problem.
But we have found them, and we're not dealing with the problem.
We need to again, we don't want to tie their hands. We want to have some sort of accountability, yes, but we've been tying their hands behind their backs, and this is why we're having the problem.
They have unprecedented powers compared to any time ever in our history, and it hasn't succeeded. And the idea always, which seems to be with both the solutions that have been put forward here, more bombing or more surveillance, all that we're doing is not saying what did we do wrong in the first place.
Okay.
What was wrong with the war in Iraq?
Let me just bring in, obviously about 3 months ago, there was the refugee concern about Syria, and driven by the tragic story of the young child dead on the beach. Now, is the sentiment going to change on that? We've promised to take 20,000.
Listen, I'm more in favor of immigration than people give me credit for. But at the same time, I want to know who's coming through my front door. And I want, what I find
is that fair, Lindsey, to say that?
Well, I think the problem here is that the refugees, the vast majority of the refugees, are people who are fleeing wars. That's why they're coming here. That's why they're coming from Syria, Afghanistan, all these countries. Now, if you look at the people responsible for the terror attacks, various cases over the last few years, the vast majority of them are people who haven't been refugees from anywhere. They're people who have been radicalised in their own countries. So this idea that we should target the refugees as potentially terrorists, especially when, as far as I can see, the passport which was supposedly found in Paris turns out to be a forgery, and therefore it seems that it didn't involve people who were refugees from Syria, I think only helps to build up a discourse which actually is very, very dangerous in terms of scapegoating refugees who are exactly the people.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Lindsey German, a convener from Stop the War Coalition.